To talk about my views on the First
No,
Amendment.
no. That's not what I asked you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
In the context of the cases, not for free speech. No, that was not the context of that particular
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for taking your time to be here today. Dr. Franks, we're here to talk about free speech, correct?
Yes.
And we're here to talk about that being a fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the Supreme Court plays an essential role in guaranteeing those constitutional rights, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about a tweet that you had in January 2024. The Supreme Court is a death panel. Is that your opinion?
In the context of this hearing, I think it is important to emphasize why I am here, which is to talk about my views on the First Amendment.
No. That's not what I asked you. Do you think the Supreme Court is a death panel?
In the context of the cases, not for free speech. No, that was not the context of that particular
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, it appears that you see the Supreme Court as a death panel, and that is some of the same rhetoric that, unfortunately, we continue to hear from some on the left who are trying to villainize justices who are doing their job. And I would like to just ask you, knowing that you have put this out, that the Supreme Court is a death panel, then let me ask you this. Do you look at Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson as members of the death panel, or is this just the justices that you disagree with?
I do not believe that the comments that you are referring to have relevance for this particular hearing, but here's what I will say. This is an administration that is threatening judges in addition to other people that he disagrees with. So, okay, yes, if your question is, do I defend judges? Am I worried about judges' security? I am. I am worried about this administration essentially threatening those judges.
I want to talk with you, Ms. Hemingway, about the State Department's use of the Global Engagement Center to censor news outlets like the Daily Wire and the Federalist. I know that this is something that you have had to deal with. And Daily Wire is located in Tennessee. We're proud of them. We are delighted that they chose to move from California over to Tennessee. And it is my understanding that the Global Engagement Center was created to counter messaging from bad actors, including terrorist groups, but the Biden administration weaponized it to silence conservative groups. And what has the censorship, I call it the censorship industrial complex, what do you think they're trying to hide when it targets outlets like the Federalist and the Daily Wire?
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Yes, our reporter, Margot Cleveland, who's our senior legal writer, uncovered through her reporting facets of the censorship industrial complex and learned that the State Department was one of the federal entities that was engaging with non-governmental organizations and other entities in big tech to market, promote censorship tools and blacklists, which were then used against my publication, The Federalist, and also the Daily Wire. Publications that are a threat to the reigning orthodoxies are targeted by the censorship industrial complex. They want to exist without people pointing out their lies or the fact that they're really important debates. And so we are suing the State Department for that, and it is ongoing, this support of the censorship industrial complex. It is the bureaucracy, really, which perpetuates this even more than a particular administration.
Yes, and I think it's so important to note that robust, respectful, bipartisan debate adds to our freedom, helps to keep us free, and allows that debate in the public square. And when you have an entity that becomes weaponized and shuts down one side of that speech and only allows speech with which it completely agrees, that is when you have that censorship writ large. My time expires. Professor Turley, I have a question I will submit to you for the record. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Hemingway.
At that moment, when Senator Marsha Blackburn leaned forward, voice sharpened to a blade and syllables cracking through the marble silence, the room seemed to contract around a single phrase. No, 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 no. That's not what I asked you. It wasn't just an interruption. It was an assertion of dominance the audible collision of political conviction and personal disdain. Dr. Frank, seated beneath the glow of those unflattering committee lights, tried to redirect the conversation toward context, nuance, the kind of academic framing that usually protects a scholar from the storm. But Blackburn's tone cut through that defense. She wanted no context, only confession. And in that instant, we saw it. The anatomy of modern American hearings. Not inquiry, but theater. Not dialogue, but spectacle. A scene where ideology takes the witness stand and truth becomes a weapon to be brandished rather than pursued. This was a hearing about free speech, or at least that was the headline. But the irony rippled through every exchange. A debate on constitutional freedom transformed into a performance of control. Blackburn's voice, forceful and unyielding, echoed the contradiction that defines so much of our political discourse, the defense of speech that serves power and the silencing of speech that challenges it. When she read the words from that old tweet, "The Supreme Court is a death panel," the meaning was no longer the point. Context evaporated. Symbolism was irrelevant. What mattered was the soundbite, the weaponization of outrage. Because in Washington today, perception has become the new truth. Behind Blackburn's interrogation, there was something deeper than partisanship. There was fear, the fear of losing control over narrative, over the flow of information, over who gets to define America itself. Her line of questioning turned from a single scholar's words to an entire apparatus of perceived threat. Media outlets, online platforms, global engagement centers, the bureaucratic machinery of information. In her framing, the state had turned its tools inward, pointing them not at foreign adversaries, but at American citizens, American voices, American dissent. And in that claim, a different truth emerged, one worth reflecting on. Because censorship is not a left or right issue, it's a human one. Each time government or industry seeks to manage the public mind, we inch closer to an invisible cage, a place where expression becomes permissioned and freedom becomes conditional. But look closer at what unfolded here. Blackburn's fury at censorship coexisted with her refusal to let her witness speak freely. Her insistence on answers without nuance mirrored the very dynamic she condemned. This is the paradox of our politics. The cry for liberty delivered through the language of control. The call for open debate shouted over someone else's attempt to explain. Dr. Franks' attempt to situate her comment, to link it to larger questions of judicial power, life and death, and constitutional consequence, never found oxygen. Instead, Blackburn reframed her words as an assault on the judiciary itself, as though one tweet were a dagger aimed at the Republic. The moral weight of that exchange hung heavy. What happens when language becomes trial, when a sentence becomes a sentence? Moments later, Blackburn pivoted, as if to cleanse the air, toward a friendlier witness, Molly Hemingway. And suddenly the energy shifted. Gone was the interrogation. In its place, affirmation, agreement, applause for the Daily Wire, praise for Tennessee, and shared condemnation of the so-called censorship industrial complex. It was a seamless rhetorical turn from confrontation to solidarity, from scolding to celebration. The subtext was unmistakable. The boundaries of free speech were drawn not by principle, but by allegiance. Some voices deserved defense. Others deserved humiliation. In the soft cadence of Hemingway's response, the hearing seemed to exhale. She spoke of bureaucratic overreach, of digital blacklists, of the government's quiet partnerships with Silicon Valley, words that carry their own legitimate alarm. But behind the policy details lay a deeper moral question. When every side claims to be the silenced victim, who is actually listening? The committee chamber, grand and echoing, became a metaphor for our national conversation. Everyone speaking, no one hearing. The Constitution invoked like Scripture, yet its meaning bent and reshaped to suit the day's narrative. Still, amid the sparring, a truth shimmered faintly. Democracy depends on disagreement. Honest, messy, uncomfortable debate is not a weakness of the system. It is the beating heart of it. What we witnessed in this hearing was not simply political theater, but the tragic erosion of that sacred exchange, where inquiry gives way to accusation and freedom becomes a partisan prop. If you listen carefully to the closing moments, the hurried thanks, the perfunctory gratitude, the shuffle of papers as staffers gather their notes, you can almost hear the fatigue in the air. Everyone claims victory, but no one leaves wiser. And that is the quiet crisis of our time. We defend free speech by silencing others. We preach transparency while hiding behind outrage. We invoke patriotism while eroding the empathy that built this nation in the first place. Senator Blackburn's words will make their way through the news cycle, clipped and shared and spun 100 different ways. Dr. Franks's face, frozen mid-sentence, will become another thumbnail in the endless scroll of partisan conflict. And somewhere between those two images, authority and defiance, accusation and restraint, the meaning of free speech itself flickers like a fading light. In a country built on words, we must remember, freedom is not proven by how loud we shout, but by how deeply we listen. The Constitution was not written to protect comfort. It was written to protect conscience, and every time a voice is cornered in the halls of power, we are reminded of how fragile that promise remains. So as the cameras dim and the senators file out, we are left with a question, one that no committee can answer. Will America choose the courage to hear what it does not want to hear? This is liberal freedom, where the truth is not partisan, the fight is not for power, but for principle. Subscribe, stay vigilant, and help us keep the light of free expression alive. Because democracy dies not in darkness, but in the noise that drowns out its own voice.